Hello, how are you all doing? Hopefully you guys are doing pretty good. Hopefully the summer's not killing you guys too much. It's been getting a little bit warmer here. Still really haven't broken 100 since our first heat wave. We've been kind of in the 90s this last week, so not too bad. But, you know, just kind of, since we had the last heat wave, I think I mentioned this on the last stream, it kind of enabled us to catch up a little bit. Last week was kind of a little bit slow, but this week, today, kind of started off strong. We had quite a few calls and stuff. So, you know, it's really interesting. And I don't know about you guys, but here, you know, I deal 99% of my work is restaurants. And, you know, the trend with, especially with chain restaurants, is to cut back on preventative maintenances. So, you know, a lot of people have been cutting back on them, and a lot of people, you know, we're seeing the repercussions of it. So we've had one of our really, really big restaurant chains. They cut the preventative maintenances out about 5 years ago. And we were a little surprised, like, because we noticed the first year we thought, you know, everything was going to hit the fan. And the first year it was kind of, okay. Second year, third year, but the fourth year is when it really hit the fan. And the fifth year, this is the fifth year of it. And same thing. I mean, we're just going crazy right now because no longer do we get a service call where we have just a bad contactor on an air conditioning unit. We get a service call, kind of like my last video where I showed you guys the Linux unit that had a leak repair. Similar to that. We get a service call where, you know, air conditioner not working, and we go up there and we find that every unit is neglected. The belts are loose, the evaporators are dirty, condensers are dirty, refrigerant charge is low, and, you know, we no longer get that 45-minute to 2-hour service call. We now have 8 to 10-hour service calls because, you know, we bring everything up to them. You know, big picture diagnosis, right? So, hey, do you want me to clean all your condensers? Do you want me to address this? Do you want, you know, so it just kind of leads into the craziness. And so that's kind of what we're going through. You know, we don't have a lot of preventative maintenance work anymore like we used to. You know, 10 years ago, we were slammed with preventative maintenance work. And then we had, or probably longer than 10 years ago, before the recession, we had crazy preventative maintenance work, you know. But at the same time, you kind of got to understand the trends and what's going on. And, you know, like I said, 99% of my work is chain restaurant work. And, you know, casual dining in general is really hurting. Casual dining, and what they consider casual dining is a sit-down restaurant that you order from a waitress. Okay, casual dining in general is really hurting, and you know, the fast casual restaurants, you know, the ones where you just go up to the order stand, you order your food, and you go sit down at the table. Those ones, like your Chipotles and your, you know, little mom and pop casual or fast casual restaurants, and, you know, the pokey places and whatever. Those places are slamming right now, and even those I think are starting to hurt a little bit, but it's just interesting how they cut back on the preventative maintenances. But, I mean, we're really making it up right now because we get these, you know, 8-hour service calls where you go out there and it's like, when do I stop? We literally have to do that. You know, the one where I showed that Linux package unit that had a refrigerant leak. Where do I stop? So, luckily, I had my apprentice with me, and he's doing really well, by the way. But I had him with me, and he... you know, he was able to help me clean condensers, basically. So he was able to clean the other condensers while I was cleaning the problematic AC, and then I troubleshooted the problematic AC. But then it's like, okay, do I put my gauges on every stage of every other AC? You know, do I bring it up to the customer? Do I clean the walk-in condensers? Do I check the belts on the exhaust fans? You know, where do you stop, basically? And, you know, where I stop is I try to, if I have time, you know, if I'm approaching overtime, I typically, and overtime for us is after 4 o'clock p.m. So if I'm approaching overtime, I typically kind of, I'm just going to finish up what I'm working on, and then I'll bring it to the customer's attention. And then if they want me to dive into stuff more, then I'll give them the option, you know. But it's very interesting with that trend, you know, because we no longer go in there and catch problems before they happen. And I still have a few customers that do really good preventative maintenance work, but, you know, the majority of them, they don't. And then they just want you to, you know, fix it. So, you know, it is what it is. It frustrates us and it frustrates me, but at the same time, you got to evolve, because if you get angry, it's not going to solve, because either they're going to continue to call you or they're going to call someone else. Bottom line. So if you don't like the customer, you need to make up your mind. You either want to do their work or you don't, and you kind of got to play their games. You know, they're not going to bend over backwards for you, and, you know, you just got to deal with it. You know, it is what it is. So, I will, let's see. Very large chain. So Dave, you said you work for a very large chain and you demand PM from your vendors. That's good, Dave. That's really good, man. You know, a lot of places I get that don't. So that's really, really cool. Dave, have you sent me an email? I think you might have sent me an email. You don't need to name the place that you work, but I think you sent me an email. For some reason, your name looks familiar. But anyways, so I want to get to your guys' questions in the chat as usual, and I've got a little list here of stuff, and I kind of want to start off with a bang. How to service call today? Well, let's start with this question. So I got a question in my email, actually on the air conditioner, the Linux air conditioner video that I released. Okay. Recently, I think it was it yesterday's video? Yeah, I think it was. Yeah, yesterday's video. So I got a couple questions about using, you know, how come I didn't use leak sealant on that unit? Okay, the leaks were so small, leak sealant would have been a great thing for it. And I'm not trying to knock those of you that want to use leak sealant. Okay. I do remember you, Dave. I remember you. Yeah, I know who you are. You don't need to mention anything unless you want to. But yeah, anyways. So I used, so the question was, why didn't I use leak sealant in that package unit? Because the leaks were so small. Okay. And I'm not trying to knock those of you that do use leak sealants. Okay. But personally, my stance on any additives on the system is I prefer not to use them. I'm not going to say that I'm never going to use an additive, because I'm always going to give the customer, you know, the option to do what they want to do. I'm always going to give them my opinions about things and let them know, hey, I don't want to use this product. I will not warranty anything if you have me use this product. But some of the customers, I've literally had a customer demand like, hey, before we change that package unit, I want you to put this leak sealant in there. I want to get another year out of the unit. And I just made sure. So I did use a leak sealant one time, but I made sure that customer understood. I'm not recommending this. You know, they brought it to me. They brought the products, you know, they wanted me to use the product. I still bought it, but they wanted me to use it. And I just gave them all the facts. Like, look, this is what it can cause. And in that situation, they wanted to use it. It didn't work. It didn't, well, I shouldn't say it didn't harm anything, but it didn't work. But anyways, I digress. I'm going off on a tangent. But the whole point of me bringing that up was the leak sealants in the system. My stance on them is that I don't want to put anything into the system that didn't come with the system. The only thing that came with the system is refrigerant and oil, the refrigeration oil that's in there. I don't like adding the additives, okay? I don't like adding flushes if I don't have to, okay? There is instances where I might use a flush, but I prefer not to. I prefer to use refrigerant and oil, okay? And that's kind of where I want to go with that. Now, so today I had a service call at one of my restaurants where they called me and said their ice machine wasn't working. So I walked up to the ice machine, and this is a customer that I've serviced for a very long time, but this particular location, for whatever reason, likes to use another service company that happens to be in the same area as us. And they kind of go back and forth. They sometimes, I don't know what it is, they'll call that service company, but then sometimes they'll call me. And I kind of get a little frustrated with it. And lately they've been calling me more, whatever. I just kind of deal with it and move on, you know? So anyways, right when I walk up to these ice machines, the first thing I see is this other service company stickers on it. And they look fairly new. So it looks like they just worked on this ice machine. And right when I walk up, it sounded like the machine was low on gas, okay? And the reason why I say that, if you experienced techs know what I'm talking about, it sounded like the expansion valves were trying to feed vapor refrigerant. It was making that hissing sound. The hiss of death, I think, is what NorCal Dave called it one time. But it basically is just kind of using your senses. You can usually tell when you've got a low refrigerant charge on like a walk-in cooler or something like that, okay? So at first I thought, hey, I'm low on charge. But I go ahead and check out the machines, and I notice they're acting kind of funky. So I put my service gauges on them, and the pressures just don't add up. So I went ahead on, this was both machines. They were both off on safeties, and they were both just kind of acting funky. So I went ahead and put my gauges on there. After I figured out the pressures didn't add up, I went ahead and turned both machines off. And I noticed something. The machines did not shut off. Both machines continued to run, and I can audibly hear them. You know, I could hear the hissing of the what now I figured out was solenoid valves. I thought it was expansion valves feeding vapor refrigerant, but no, it was these were Manitowoc CVD machines, so cool vapor defrost machines. So what was happening was, on each machine, one of the cool vapor solenoid valves and the liquid line valve were both stuck open. So no matter what happened, if I disconnected power to those machines, completely disconnected power, the compressor units on the roof were continuing to run because the solenoid valves would not shut. Okay, so first I kind of like, okay, step back, because it seems very odd that both machines are doing the exact same thing and both machines have 2 solenoid valves that are stuck open. So it kind of gets me wondering. So then I see the other company's sticker on there, and it just kind of makes me wonder, did that other company come in there and put a leak sealant in that system? Because why would I have 2 identical machines right next to each other at the same time have 2 bad solenoid valves on each machine? Very strange, very peculiar. My gut feeling is that someone put a leak sealant in there and that stuff is gumming up the system. Now, there's always the possibility. Manitowoc many years ago had a bunch of cool vapor valves that were sticking. That was a thing that they had for a while. But these machines are from 2011. They've ran fine. We've never had to change any of their valves, and all of a sudden, they both have 2 solenoid valves that failed at the same time. Sounds a little peculiar to me, and kind of makes me wonder if another service company had put a leak sealant in there and caused that problem. So, who knows? But I don't prefer to use any leak sealants. In this situation, I'm going to strongly recommend that customer consider replacing both of those ice machines, not just because of the stuck solenoid valves, but the machines in general are in very poor condition, very, very dirty. Yes, they could be cleaned. Yes, they could be repaired, but I'm just going to give them a price and say, hey, look, we're going to need to put X number of dollars into these machines, and we may run into problems later, and kind of give them the options and let them make that educated decision, with the information that I give them. So that's how I'm going to approach that situation. But I thought that was an interesting one. So, and again, I'm not knocking you guys that choose to use leak sealants. I just don't understand them. They scare me, and I just don't want to do it. So, and my personal preference is I'd rather not use any additives you add to the system, but I'm not going to say I have never used them, because yes, I have. And I've covered this before, but in a situation where we had a really, really peculiar leak, I did add dye to a system. I've used it 2 times. I'm not a fan of it because that stuff makes a mess, but it is what it is. So, all right. Mr. Ice. No, I'm not really a fan of AC Renew either, but I have used it. I've never had great luck with it. I have used it as a last ditch effort. We're talking it's either Zerol Ice is what it used to be called. Now it's rebranded as AC Renew. And, I have used it to try to clean up the actuators on a carrier package unit. I haven't had any luck with it. I just haven't really had much luck. But I do know that they, when the carrier debacle was going on with the expansion valves and the Copeland compressors, that actually it wasn't a carrier. It was a Copeland debacle with the Copeland compressors because of the rust inhibitor, Y'all have heard that, okay? I know that all of the manufacturers are pretty much approving to use that AC Renew. I think for them, in all honesty, it was more of a which is cheaper, to try this product that might work or to pay out claims on every single machine out there and, basically replace systems. So I think the manufacturers went with the additive just because it was cheaper for them with the liability. HVACR North, thank you so very much, man. I really appreciate it. So, anyways, there's my thing. So, any advice for someone new to the trade? I am a fat kid one. That's an interesting name, bud. Basically, if you're green, if you don't know anything, just listen to your peers, listen to your senior mechanics, absorb everything you can like a sponge. Don't run your mouth, meaning don't get, lippy with people, don't raise an attitude. Even if someone's saying something that doesn't quite sound right, before you open your mouth, kind of ask them politely, what do you mean by that? Why are you telling me to do it this way when school's telling me to do it this way? That kind of stuff. You don't got to be confrontational about things. Do you remember, even I was I was brought up in the trade by an old school tech, my dad, and, everything didn't make sense, but he did have some smart stuff behind what he was telling me. Even though it wasn't 100% right, it was basic troubleshooting stuff, and I learned from that. And then I also learned, okay, that's not quite right. I'm going to adjust this and do this way. So I'd love to talk to you some more. If you want to send me an email to hvacrvideos@gmail.com, I can give you some more tips on, what to do as a new person in the trade. So, all right. Any of you guys that HVACR North, happy Canada Day, man. Any of you guys that want to put questions in here, you will really help myself and Justin, my moderator, out if you put those questions in caps lock, okay? Because it really, really greatly helps us to make sure we don't miss the questions. So, all right. Right on, Superior. You know, and to each their own. If the additives work for you guys, I'm not saying you're wrong for using them. I just choose not to use them. So I've certainly heard a lot of people say to use certain additives, and they work great for them. So, you know, go for it. Just not my choice. DHard01, you said leak lock or nylog, and grew up in the trade using leak lock, but I hate the stuff now. My term for leak lock was called blue death, and because it basically would be the death of you because it would end up on your nose. In my case, in my nose, because I pick my nose all the time. It would end up in your ears. It would end up everywhere, right? Blue death sucks. I am a huge proponent of nylog. I've used nylog for a couple years now. Never had a problem with it. It does not harden like leak lock would, but it works great as a lubricating medium, basically, for when you're putting mechanical joints together and different things. And then, you know, it also will lubricate threads when you're trying to tighten things. It's a great product. So I like nylog a lot. So, okay, ReeferTech Mark, you asked me, could I please go into the approach method that I mentioned in the Linux video? So the approach method is kind of, and I say in the Linux video that it's basically an ass backwards way of doing subcooling. Linux basically takes the liquid line temperature, and this is a Linux, so the actual temperature of the liquid line, the surface temperature of the liquid line, and they compare it to the outdoor ambient. And that is how they determine an approach method. So it really is a non-invasive way to test whether or not the condenser essentially is rejecting the correct amount of heat. Okay, so I will try to explain that a little bit more in a video where I can show some visuals rather than just talk about it here. I will say that I highly suggest that you use the app, and this is another thing I wanted to talk about. When I'm working with my videos, I'm using the app Measure Quick, and that's an app that was made by Mr. Jim Bergman, who's just a great guy in the industry. He's been part of a lot of developing of different tools and stuff, but he made that Measure Quick app, and it has a lot of great information. And the cool thing about the Measure Quick app is it has basically an explanation for almost every feature and every term that's within the app. So if you click on the approach method, I believe there's even a little asterisk or something like that that you can click on, and it'll give you the definition of approach method. It probably links you, I think, to an HVAC school article that Brian Orr wrote, I believe, about approach method, and it's a great app. So if you guys haven't already been using Measure Quick, I highly suggest you guys consider it. It's a free app. I have no affiliation with them. It's just something that I really like. So, all right. Let me see. Let me get a drink here, and I'm going to get to some more questions here, and then I got some other stuff I want to cover too. So it was interesting because someone, I don't know if you're in here or not, because I know I sent a message to you. Someone sent me a message or commented on my very first live stream that was in October of last year. And he was saying something about good information or something, you know, in the video comments or whatever. And it was just kind of funny to see someone comment on my live stream video from that long ago. It seems like that was so long ago, but really it was just October when I started these streams. And I just want to say thank you to all you guys that come into these. You know, I'm just trying to share the little bit of knowledge that I have, so I appreciate all the support that I get from you guys. Yeah, a lot of people can use approach method. It's just a method of checking the performance of the condenser, essentially. So, let's see. Okay, so that's a great question, Sean Mack. So what concerns me the most about restaurant refrigeration trade business now and in the future? And my biggest concern, my biggest concern is the lack of new blood coming into the trade, and the people that we do have coming into the trade right now, you know, they have a lot to make up for with the amount of people that we're losing. And when it comes to the restaurant stuff, and then on top of that, okay, so California is a whole different ballgame, right? We have crazy high tax rates, right? I think that I heard that as of today in the city of this is just the city of Los Angeles. I think I heard on the radio when I was getting out of the car that minimum wage went to $14.25 today. $14.25 for state minimum wage in the city of Los Angeles. That's not the whole state, but that's just the city of Los Angeles. And similarly, we have all kinds of minimum wage rates going up all over the place too. You know, we have some cities will control it, and then we have the state that controls it. We completely ignore federal minimum wage here. We just blow it out of the water. Now, I don't want to get political and talk about yes or no and all that different stuff, but I will say that as far as the restaurants go, that worries me, because what we will start to see is the bigger chain restaurants are going to start changing things up. Okay, they're going to start, and they're already doing it. My wife's a server at a restaurant here in Southern California, and they're already basically don't have them hand write their tickets anymore. You don't take an order on a pad of paper. You input it into a little computer. It sends it to the, to the kitchen. Some restaurants, you can actually order your food without even talking to the server. And basically every restaurant is trying to survive. And when they have to pay those crazy high minimum wage rates, it hurts the restaurants. You know, the prices of the food goes up and everything. So with the cost of living here in California, restaurants, being a service technician or a business owner that deals with restaurants and services restaurants on a regular, it worries me, because these restaurants are really starting to question whether or not it's worth it to have these establishments in this state. And they're doing all kinds of things to avoid it. Whether it be a big chain, they're going to franchise out and have franchisees basically handle the burden, and then they're just going to collect a franchise fee. So there's all kinds of different stuff. But that's the biggest thing that I'm scared of is, the restaurants hurting so bad, and us having to the equipment's still going to break, and it's still going to cost the same, if not go up, because everything else is going up. So it hurts their bottom line basically when they have to fix this stuff. So that's a concern I have for restaurants. All right. Kanga, thank you very much, man. I really appreciate it. Okay. How do I change oil in a system when replacing a R22 refrigerant? So there's a couple different methods. If you have a newer scroll compressor, which most of the time you're not, a lot of times they'll have an oil port on the bottom of the compressor. It's got a Schrader in it, and you could essentially drain the oil from the compressor from that port. Okay, it's at the bottom of the crankcase, and it just drains out. If you don't, you really don't have very many other options but to tip the compressor over and pour the oil out. But that is a risk in itself, because that compressor is not meant to sit upside down. And if you've ever pulled a scroll compressor apart, or even a reciprocating compressor, you can damage the internals by flipping it over. So it's not something you want to do on a regular. But I guess worst case scenario, you can tip the compressor over. If it's a big semi-hermetic compressor, you can usually pump the oil out. They have pump mechanisms. They usually have oil ports on them. I've heard of some people saying push this, there's like these little chinguses that you can put in the suction line, and like feeds down to the bottom of the crankcase, but I don't really trust any of that stuff. So really, if you don't have an oil port on the compressor, you really just got to pour it out. You got to unsweat the compressor, pour the oil out, basically weigh in new oil. You just essentially whatever oil you get out of the compressor, you're going to put the new oil with that particular weight back in there, and then you're going to braze the compressor back in, which is kind of sketchy. So, there's not a lot of great options, and that leads us to some problems, especially with the R22 phase out, with the prices of R22 going up. We have to choose. Do we want to use an alternative refrigerant, or do we want to stick with R22? It might be cheaper, depending on how hard it is to get that compressor out, to go ahead and replace the compressor. I mean, there's so many different ways to go about it. So, all right. Let's see what else I got going on here. Hey there, Adam. How you doing, bud? Okay, Quinn, you said, do I have experience in large-scale systems, chillers, process cooling? No, I don't. I'm sorry. I only work on the small stuff. I do light commercial refrigeration. 99% of my work is restaurant stuff. So package units, basically 35 tons and smaller. And refrigeration systems, probably no bigger than 5 horsepower and smaller. So I don't work on the big giant, industrial and or supermarket stuff at all. So, all right. Yeah, exactly. Pour oil out and meg it. All right. Okay, so I got a couple topics here I want to cover. So this was a really good question. Someone said, why is there a fan delay on a walk-in freezer, and how long should that fan delay be set for? Okay, so I don't think he quite understood, and there's nothing wrong with that, but I don't think he quite understood, because we don't set the time frame of how long a fan delay delays for, okay? So let's step back to a walk-in freezer. So what happens on a walk-in freezer is our evaporator temperature, while we're bringing the box temperature down below freezing, typically on most walk-in freezers and restaurants, we're going to maintain a negative 10 degree box temp, okay? The negative 10 is usually because we have ice cream in there and we want to keep the ice cream not rock hard, but we want to keep it firm so that way it's not melty when they go to serve it. So we usually maintain -10 box temp, and doing so, my coil temperature is usually going to be 10 degrees below that. So we've got an extremely cold evaporator coil, okay? Anything below 32 degrees is freezing, right? So we start to build up ice particles on that walk-in freezer evaporator coil. So we have to do something to defrost those ice particles. So what we'll do typically on a standard walk-in freezer system is we have electric strip heaters that are built into the evaporator coil. And periodically throughout the day, based off of a defrost clock of some sort, we're going to defrost that evaporator. When we defrost that evaporator, we're going to turn off the evaporator fan motors, we're going to turn off the compressor, and we're going to activate the strip heaters. Okay, the strip heaters are going to warm up. They're typically located on the bottom of the coil and then usually throughout the coil, and the heat's going to rise and it's going to melt any frost that's on that walk-in freezer as long as it's not excessive. So once we go through the defrost process and we're all done, we have a problem now. Because that evaporator coil is more than likely, the coil surface temperature itself is more than likely about 55 degrees. And at 55 degrees, you're going to have condensation now. Okay, it's no longer going to be frozen. You're still going to have warm strip heat coming up from those strip heaters. So you turn it off, and if you turn the system back on, those evaporator fan motors start running, and it's going to blow all that moisture or condensation off of that coil. And then it's going to instantly freeze because your box temp is still below zero. Even though your evaporator surface coil temperature is 55 degrees. Hey, Wink, thanks so much, man. You know, the evaporator surface temperature is still 55. The air temperature inside the box is still very low. So when you start up those fans, it's going to blow that moisture right off and it's instantly going to freeze. Okay, so what you'll see if that happens is you'll see a bunch of ice on the fan guards, and then you'll see water droplets that have blown onto the ceiling, but then they refroze. So you'll see water droplets everywhere. And then you'll see a lot of steam and or vapor moisture, moving around inside the air. So we add a fan delay to the box, and the fan delay usually, and don't quote me on these numbers, but I think with Heatcraft, I believe the fan delay brings the evaporator surface temperature down to about 30 or 35 degrees, I believe, before the evaporator fan motors turn on. I think it might go down to 20 degrees, I think. Each, like Russell and Heatcraft, they change it up. But basically, we want to get that evaporator below freezing, so that way any of those ice droplets, they refreeze and they don't blow off of the evaporator coil, okay? So that's the purpose of having a fan delay. I've been getting a lot of requests for a video. Again, I've already made quite a few, but I've been getting a lot of requests explaining and simplifying walk-in freezer control systems and different stuff. So I will be working on that, and we'll try to get you guys one that explains it a little bit more. So, all right. Let me see what else we got. Any more questions, guys? Let's throw them in caps lock, and I'll try to get to them for you guys. Okay, I'm going to go to my list right here. I had a question come through talking about here in Southern California locally, and this may not apply to all you guys, but basically people were asking for training resources in this area. What schools are the best? I'm not going to knock any of the for-profit trade schools, okay? But I prefer and I highly suggest that for most people that are going to be working in the trade, they don't have time to go 5 days a week to a trade school. So a lot of times what you can do is you can go to the community colleges. The community colleges usually have night classes. Matt, thank you so very much, man. So the community colleges usually have night classes. So I'd highly suggest looking into a community college. There is one for-profit trade school that's in my area that they do have a great teacher that works there. And that school is called CET. It's Center for Employment Training, I believe is what it is. I don't know the quality of the school, but I do know one of the teachers there. He's a colleague of mine, and I think he's a great teacher. So I'm going to put CET on that list. But I'd highly suggest in my local area looking at San Bernardino Valley College and or Riverside Community College. Those are the two community colleges local to me. They both have great educators there. And if for those people that were asking me that were local to me, those are great resources. So, all right. Ryan Mellinson, what made me start this HVACR videos channel? Okay, so in all honesty, I started this video for my own employees, this channel. And you guys probably, if this might give some context to my videos, if I come across being forward or kind of bossy in my videos, It's because think about it from the perspective of me. I'm a business owner and I'm making these videos for my own employees. Now, it's kind of evolved into something different, but that's what it started as. These videos were training videos for my own employees. So what happened was, hey, Ralph, thank you very much, man. I really appreciate it. So what happened was I would find myself regularly in the morning. We meet at my shop every morning. And I would find myself regularly explaining a difficult service call to my technicians that work for us, saying, hey, this was something interesting that I ran into, and I was explaining it to them. And I found myself thinking one day, it's like, why don't I just video this? Because trying to verbally explain something, it's so much easier to show someone a video. So I think I made 1 or 2 videos before I made my channel public. And I just shared them with my employees. I sent them an email. I made them on YouTube. I made them unlisted, and I shared them and said, hey, here's an interesting problem that I ran into, and just showed them to my employees. Quickly after that, I kind of saw the need, and I saw the benefit of releasing these to the public, and the channel kind of took off. So I officially started making these videos. I think I uploaded my first video in February of 2018, I believe. February of 2018 was when I uploaded my first video. And then from there, I think by June, I got onto a schedule where I was releasing, I think at the time, 3 videos a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And then I kind of scaled down because that was killing me. And I went back to 2 videos a week. And basically that's where we started. So I started making these just to help my technicians, and then made them public, and then saw some great growth from the channel, and saw some great emails and support emails and questions and, thank yous and all that good stuff. And it just kind of made me keep going. So that's why I do this. I do these videos just to help the next guy. I see that there's a huge skills gap. I see there's a lot of lack of information out there. I even ran into it myself when I was trying to learn, people not being very open with sharing the knowledge. And I really don't agree with that. So I try to share the little bit of knowledge that I have in my head with everybody. All right. Okay, cool. Ralph, can I explain the purpose of a heated vent on a walk-in freezer? Yeah, that's a really interesting one. Okay, so, let's picture your refrigerator at home. Okay, I have just a standard Whirlpool, nothing fancy, or maybe it's a Kenmore upright freezer on the left, refrigerator on the right, double door stand up, unit at my house, right? And what happens is if I open my freezer and get something out of them, getting a popsicle out of the freezer or whatever, and you shut the freezer and then you try to open it again, that freezer door won't open, because what happens is it creates a vacuum inside the freezer. So the heated vent on a walk-in freezer is actually called a vacuum breaker, okay? And what it's supposed to do is it breaks that vacuum, because what happens is, and I'm going to say this is the main reason why we have them, is you get a little lady that works in the kitchen, and she's working inside there, and for whatever reason, I noticed that most ladies that work in the kitchen, they're deathly afraid of the walk-in freezer. They think that they're going to get stuck in there, and they think that they're going to die inside the walk-in freezer, okay? So what'll happen is if you don't have a vacuum breaker on there, and you have a really tightly sealed gasket, and you have a very tight box, meaning there's no air leaks, when you go to shut that door, it will create a vacuum, and it will make it very difficult for that little old lady to get out of the freezer. And she will panic, and things will happen. Okay. It's not just ladies that it happens to. There was one restaurant where they used to keep an axe on the inside of the freezer, and is because people were afraid. I don't know what they were thinking. They were going to chop the freezer door down with an axe, but whatever. For that reason, we also keep emergency releases on if you have a latching handle on your freezer and or a locking handle, you're supposed to have an emergency release. So that way, hey, Shane, so much. Thank you so much, man. So if you have a locking or latching door, you're supposed to have an emergency release on the inside of the freezer too that bypasses the lock or the latch. So hopefully that answers your question there about the heated vent. It's essentially just called a vacuum breaker, and it's there to prevent a vacuum from creating a vacuum occurring and keeping the door shut. And we put a heater on it because we don't want that warm air from the walk-in cooler to basically freeze up that entire vent. It's because you got cold air inside the freezer, and the warm air is going to be attracted to it, and it's going to instantly create ice, and then it's going to just freeze that whole thing up. So we put a tiny little Moleon heater on it, and it just keeps it warm. So same thing with why we put a door heater around the gasket surface of a walk-in freezer too. It's just to keep it from freezing shut and from condensation building up on it and dripping all over the place. So hopefully that answers that for you. Would I recommend opening? I don't know what you mean by that, Juan. Can you rephrase that question, bud? You said, would you recommend opening own company? Shout out from, I'm thinking, Connecticut. I'm assuming that you're asking me if I recommend you opening your own service company. And that's another good question too. I really wasn't planning on talking about this, but I've been getting a lot of questions with people sending me emails saying, hey, I want to open my own service company. What tips do you want to give me? First off, I am not the person to answer business questions. Okay. I actually don't even handle a lot of the business stuff when it comes to my business. I partner with my dad. My dad handles the office stuff. I handle the service stuff. I get involved in the business stuff, but I choose to let him deal with that. And, we kind of go our own paths with that, and we kind of work together really well. But I'm kind of getting off topic there. As far as would I recommend you opening your own business, I would first off highly suggest you check out my buddy Tersh Blissett. He has a podcast called Service Business Mastery. So Service Business Mastery. Look it up on any podcast app you have. He has some great information on that. He's constantly talking about opening a business, the hardships, and all the different stuff. Business advice, I'd highly suggest you check out Tersh's podcast. You can also look up Service Business Mastery on Facebook. Tersh is very active on Facebook and Instagram, and you get all kinds of great information from that. Now, do I recommend you opening a business? First off, running a business and being an HVAC service technician is a total different world. Nothing about them is similar. Running a business, you're worried about numbers, you're worried about overhead, you're worried about employee costs, you're worried about labor rates, all this different stuff, right? Being a service technician is totally different. Even if you're the best service technician in the world, I don't suggest you jumping into owning a business without doing a lot of research. I'm going to say, financial is the biggest thing. I think that a lot of people will jump into a business and get bombarded when they don't realize how much business expenses are. Okay. You need to understand what a markup is and what your overhead is. And, there's so many variables inside of a business. So I highly suggest that you take some business classes, check out Tersh Blissett's podcast, do some reading of your own. And just because you're a great service technician, I wouldn't suggest jumping into the business ownership side unless you're fully prepared for it. If you're worried about not making enough money, as a service tech versus opening your own business, you're in for a rude awakening, because just because you own your own business and just because you charge $90 an hour doesn't mean you're making $90 an hour. Okay. You have a lot of overhead and you have a lot of expenses. Are you prepared to do warranty work? How are you going to find customers when you open your business? Are you going to work for warranty companies? Are you going to do warranty work for restaurants? All kinds of stuff. Well, guess what? If I want to go do warranty work for a restaurant, let's say I want to go work for Hvacr ice machines, right? And I want to do their service work to get me in the door to let people know what my business is about. Guess what? Hvacr ice machines, they don't pay my full labor rate. Okay. So as a business owner, if I'm sending a technician and we're charging, this isn't my rate, but let's say I'm charging $90 an hour, and guess what? Hvacr is probably only going to pay me $70 an hour, or Delfield or Carrier or whoever it is. Okay. Labor rates on warranty work are a lot less than, because they know that you're using them to get in the door. Okay. And they got to make business too. So you need to be prepared and do your research before you just open a business. I'm not saying it's a bad idea, but if you're prepared, sure, it can be great. But if you're not prepared and you don't understand, if you just think that making $35 an hour working for a service company is not enough, you really need to rethink things, because even as a business owner, you're not going to make $35 an hour half the time. Okay. There's good times and there's bad times. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that I don't make good money. I do very well for myself, but it's also very difficult. There's a lot of variables that go into it. So highly suggest you do your research. All right, let's see. When is my next video? So I typically release videos Mondays and Fridays. So lately I've been kind of moving them around. Like I've been playing, like releasing one on Sunday. So, but 2 videos a week, typically Monday and Friday. So my next video will be Friday morning usually. So yeah, guys, if you could, please type your questions in all caps. So that way we can get to them. So, all right. Yeah, exactly. Your health goes to hell. Superior makes a great point. Hey guys, so you guys are going to laugh at me. A couple streams back, I said that I got a skateboard, right? And because my daughter wanted a skateboard and I decided to buy myself one because it's been many years since I've been on a skateboard. Well, I fell and I hurt myself. and I was being silly, and I was riding my skateboard, and I hurt my wrist. My wrist basically inside, it's been about 2 or 3 weeks now. It feels like it's bruised internally, and I can still move it. I can articulate it, nothing wrong. But when I go to grip something, it really hurts inside. And I'm actually thinking about going to get an x-ray. Maybe I fractured it inside. Those are the things. Guess what? Owning a business, how's that going to work out? Yes, sure, there's insurances you can buy and different things, right? But insurance only gets you so far. So let's say I hurt myself. Let's say I broke my wrist, right? There's probably nothing I'm going to be able to do about it. I'm probably just going to put a brace on it and move on. But let's say I broke my arm for real, okay? Okay, so that's great. I have an insurance, a disability insurance, right? But what happens to my business? I'm a sole provider. Okay, so let's just say I'm the only person working at my business, and I have customers that depend on me. And yes, I broke my arm, and yes, I have insurance. And guess what? They sent me 30 grand to cover my lost wages, whatever it may be. Okay. But what happens to my customers in the 6 months or 3 months while my arm is healing? Where are they going to go? Do you think they're going to still come back to me when I get better? It's those kind of things that people don't think about as a business owner. So anyways, I don't want to go off on a tangent on business ownership. Got any more questions about that, send me an email, but look up my buddy Tersh Blissett. Great podcast, great information. So, okay. When did I realize my channel was getting really popular? It was about June. I think I hit 1,000 subscribers in June of 2018, and it just blew my mind, I think. Or maybe it was August of 2018. That number blew my mind when I hit 1,000 subscribers. And at this point right now, I think I'm 28,000 or 27,000 subscribers, I think, or something like that. But don't get me wrong. I'm obsessed with the numbers, but I get more satisfaction from your guys' emails and your comments. I get like this accomplished satisfaction from it when I see emails and being like, oh man, I really appreciate it. And I'm going to tell you guys something. So this is another thing I wanted to cover was my HVACR life series with my wife. Okay. So I've been doing these little videos. It's kind of an experiment I wanted to do where we kind of talked about the nitty gritty of being in a relationship, my wife and myself, and what her perspective on the HVACR life is, and that kind of stuff. So if you guys haven't seen it, there's a series where I have 3 videos where I talked with my wife about that stuff. Go to my channel, check it out. Okay. So that one I'm getting the utmost satisfaction, and I get barely any views on those videos. I think one of them I might have 3,000 views. I think my most recent one I have 1,800 views. So those are not good performing videos for me, but I've gotten the most satisfaction from those videos. And the reason why is the comments. The comments have not been negative, and I understand there's some negative comments. I really blow those ones to the side, but the positive comments I've been getting. So what I'm pointing out is it's not just about the views. It's the fact that someone sends me an email and says, hey, when I talked about my depression and my anxiety, someone else sent me an email and they said, dude, I'm going through the same thing. It's a trip. And they relate and they talk about their problems and they said, hey, this or this or that. I had a certain person, not going to name who it is. You know who you are, but he sent me a message and said, dude, I've been dealing with this horrible depression, and I haven't been wanting to take medicine. He goes, but I watched your video, and because my doctor his doctor had already prescribed it to him, and he decided to take his medicine. Okay, that ultimate satisfaction that person watched my video and they felt compelled to take the medicine that their doctor had already prescribed to them or something like that. Okay. So I get satisfaction from your guys' comments, even on my technical videos, the guys that say, dude, I never knew that. My recent video where I shared the tip on a carrier package unit where I had a bad disconnect, and I showed that I don't have a thermal imager, but I had an infrared laser thermometer, and I showed how I checked the disconnect switch being bad with the infrared laser thermometer. I think I got 3 or 4 comments saying, dude, I've been in the trade for 15, 20 years, and I never thought about checking a disconnect that way. Thank you so very much. That made that video. It didn't matter about the however many other views or comments. It was those 3 comments that I got. Like when someone says, thank you so very much, that's what drives me and compels me. So anyways, I'm going off on tangent. James, dude, thank you so very much, man. I really appreciate it. So I'm not changing lives, Zach. Guys, my buddy Zach is on here. I am actually going to be on, in some way or form, I'm going to be on Zach's, it's a show tomorrow, HVAC Shop Talk show tomorrow, right, Zach? Anyways, he has an interview that he did with me, good gosh, almost a month ago before everything happened. And, he's going to be releasing that one tomorrow. So, check out Zach's, show tomorrow night on the HVAC Shop Talk, YouTube channel. It'll be on there. So Zach, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate it. All right. Yeah, thank you guys. I really appreciate the feedback. And look, my buddy Chris Cassie's in here, CSC Refrigeration and HVAC. Chris and I, Chris started releasing videos about the same time too. And he's got a solid channel, guys. So check out Chris's channel too. I know he says, I follow Chris on social media too, and him and I talk occasionally. It's been a while since Chris and I have talked, but we talk occasionally. And there's a pretty good group of us guys that make videos together. And it's kind of cool when you get to communicate with them and we get to talk about different things and stuff. So pay attention to, at the end of my videos, I'm always shouting out other YouTube channels that I think are cool. Occasionally I'll recommend Chris's, or there's a bunch of different ones too. So I'm always shouting out different YouTube channels on the end of my videos. So pay attention to that too. So, all right. Have I ever had a condenser fan motor blow up? I can't say that I've had a condenser fan motor blow up. I will say, funny thing, whenever you buy a new motor from the supply house, always check to make sure they're not double shafted. And for those of you guys that have ever seen a double shafted motor that wasn't supposed to be, you know what I'm talking about. It's kind of funny. So what happens is, at the wholesale house, sometimes they'll drop the motors, and if they drop it, the shaft will actually pierce the other side. It'll push the bearing cover out the other side of the motor, so the motor will be quote unquote double shafted. So I always find that one funny whenever I go to supply houses now. I always open my motors in the supply house, spin them, make sure they're not double shafted, and then also, to save myself a headache, when I buy a motor, I always buy a run cap with it too, and I put the run cap in the box and then put it in my truck that way. So that way I don't accidentally run out of run caps or something. I always have it in the box with the motor. So, okay. How long should you leave a dryer filter on the suction line after changing a compressor? Julio, great question, because that's something I was going to cover right now. So, okay, it depends. All right. So it depends on what you're working on. And the first thing I want to cover is there's a difference. Okay. Just because you see a filter on the suction line, what looks like a filter dryer, does not mean it's an actual filter dryer, because there's things called suction line filters too that are literally just a screen within a suction shell. Okay, and we're talking about the brazed in suction line filter dryers. Okay, they also have flared in ones, but I'm not talking about the shell ones where you pull them apart and change the cores. But even those, I guess we can relate this to that. So it all depends on what the pressure drop is across the filter dryer and or filter. Okay, so depending on the AC manufacturer, they may not have a lot of room in their system for a pressure drop to be added to the system. When I say pressure drop, you're coming into that suction filter at 76 PSI, and the pressure coming out of the suction filter is more than likely going to be 75 PSI. Okay, most of the time when you install a suction filter dryer, there's going to be like a 1 PSI pressure drop, unless it's drastically oversized. Now, here's one of the dilemmas when we're dealing with a package unit. When we're dealing with a package unit, a lot of times, a package unit air conditioning unit, a lot of times there's not a lot of room in those units. So you have to go with smaller suction line filter dryers, and they typically have higher pressure drops. They're more of a restriction in the system. Now, if you can put a core dryer, where you can change the cores, okay, where it's just a mechanical fittings on the outside, you pull it apart, you put a new core in there. A lot of times those have very low pressure drops across them, but most of the braze in suction line filter dryers and or flared in suction line filter dryers, they're encapsulated. You can't change the core. Those things typically run about a 1 PSI pressure drop. Okay. So how long should you leave it in the system? Well, it really depends. Okay. Depends on every AC manufacturer. There's something about train units. They can't really handle a suction line filter dryer very well. So if you put one in there, you're immediately going to notice about a 2 PSI pressure drop sometimes, and immediately it'll plug up and then it'll become a problem. Okay. So you got to pay attention. It all depends on what the pressure drop is across the filter dryer. Now, in refrigeration systems, this was a question that I got. How come you didn't remove that suction line filter dryer out of that system? Okay. A lot of times manufacturers will install suction line filter dryers from the factory and ship them with the units. So we may leave that suction line filter dryer in there forever. As long as we don't have a pressure drop across it, it's not a big deal. Okay. So typically what we're looking for is about a 3 PSI pressure drop. Anything more than a 3 PSI pressure drop, and I'm going to be changing that thing. Even a 3 is kind of sketchy to me. If I see anything more than like 2.5 PSI, it's okay. It's time to change that thing. And just because it has a 2.5 PSI pressure drop doesn't mean that I'm going to take it out and eliminate it. I very well might put something back into that, because what's causing that thing to build up a pressure drop? More than likely it's full of crap. So we may need to put a new one back in to catch more of the crap. We wouldn't have a need for suction line filter dryers, and for that sake, even liquid line filter dryers, if we didn't have contaminants in the system. If we reduce the contaminants in the system, we don't need to put in a liquid line dryer or a suction line dryer. But it's almost impossible to not have contaminants in our system. When we're brazing, when we're cutting, there's copper flakes, there's carbon flakes, there's different stuff that happens in the system that creates, if we have the older refrigerants that had chlorine in them, like R12 and different things, the chlorinated refrigerants, we would have the ability for acids to build up when you got moisture in the system, okay? If you have a compressor burnout, you can get different contaminants in the system. You can contaminate the oil, different things. That's when you really, really need filter dryers, okay? So when do you change a filter dryer? If it's a liquid line, in my opinion, anytime you open the system. If it's a suction line filter dryer, whenever it plugs up or the pressure drop exceeds about 2.5 PSI to 3 PSI, it's time to change that thing and more than likely put another one back in. But you got to be cautious if you're working on air conditioning systems. If you're working on a residential package unit, a residential split system, I'd be very cautious about leaving a filter dryer in there because they don't have a lot of room for wiggle room for a pressure drop to be added to the system, basically, okay? It's going to affect all kinds of different things. When you build up too much of a pressure drop, you affect the velocity of the refrigerant coming back. That affects the oil return. That affects the compressor cooling, all kinds of different stuff. So that's kind of a loaded question. Hopefully I answered that enough for you guys. So, all right. How to check water pressure in a restaurant without a pressure gauge for an ice machine. How to check water pressure? You need a pressure gauge. There's no way you're going to check water pressure. You can check water flow in an ice machine by measuring the gallons per minute. But that's not really going to tell you the pressure. So if you want to know your actual water pressure, you really need to just check water pressure. Now, what you can do, oftentimes, this is kind of you can go find the, Raphael, thank you so very much, man. So if you want to check water pressure, like let's say, for instance, the ice machine doesn't have a gauge on it. So as long as there's no other water flowing in the building, and that's damn near impossible, you can typically go to another water spigot somewhere in the building where you can put a pressure gauge on it. But that's a very sketchy way to do it because there's a lot of things that can affect water pressure. The only way to properly do it on an ice machine is to check at the actual fitting. A lot of times things that cause massive pressure drop in an ice machine as far as water flow going into them is people use braided flexible connectors and or what do they call them? Angle stop valves are highly restrictive. It depends on the manufacturer. Now, I will also say that a lot of manufacturers, they really don't tell you what the water pressure should be versus what the gallons per minute should be, because that's really what matters, is how fast you can deliver that water to the machine and at what quantities you can deliver it. So the gallons per minute on a Hvacr ice machine is absolutely critical. That's the only way the machine's going to operate properly as far as harvest and freezing goes, is if you deliver the correct amount of water at the right amount of time on one of their machines. So that's the gallons per minute measurement. So to measure the gallons per minute without a water, without a gauge, basically, because there's a GPM gauge you can put on there, but we hardly ever have that. So just find something that you know. So a lot of times on a Hvacr ice machine, if you're working with like a 1,600 pound machine, they have a 5-gallon sump. So if you fill up that machine, you can wait for the machine to start to overflow the water out the standpipe. And once you start to overflow, you filled up the 5-gallon mark. So if you timed your cycle as it was filling, then you could say that 5 gallons filled in, however many minute and a half or whatever, then you could do the math to find out the gallons per minute. So, okay. All right, what's my best way to check for a bad compressor? Really depends on what you're working on, Ramon. Okay, we're going to check voltage going to the compressor. Do we have the proper voltage being delivered to the compressor? But there's different ways a compressor can be bad, okay? So if we have an electrical problem, we're going to check proper voltage going to it, whether it be 115 volts, 208, 230, 460, and even bigger. I don't work anything bigger than 460, but check for proper voltage being delivered to the compressor, and you need to make sure you check voltage correctly, okay? We're not taking one lead, checking it to ground and saying, oh yeah, we got 115 volts, because we need to check from ground to neutral, okay? Well, if we're doing 115 or even power line 1 to common, if we're working on 208 or bigger, we need to make sure that we have proper power being delivered to the compressor if we have proper power being delivered and it's not off on thermal overload, then we potentially have an issue. Okay. So feel free to send me an email and I'll, yeah, the Tito 209. Have I ever had a customer not liking the price and not wanting to pay? Yes, I've had it happen a few times. Most of the time, it's one-off customers. It's not my big chain restaurants because we can usually work with them and we know what they're willing to pay and we, you know, they know our prices and different things. But yes, I have had a few of them. Hang on just one sec. Let me see what this is. Okay, cool. Yes, I have had a few customers over the years that have refused to pay. And a lot of times, I'm going to be honest with you, depending on if it's a small customer and it's a small bill, less than $1,000, it's usually easier just to tell them not to call you again and move on. I'm not giving you guys business advice. That's just my method on it. You know, if it's under $1,000 and you just know it's just going to be more of a pain in the butt, that's another thing you got to think about as a business owner too. Because, okay, so someone says, hey, you need to put a lien on their building or you need to send them to collections, right? Well, how much does that cost you? How much does it cost for me and my secretary to spend 3-4 hours on the phone with a collections agency? You know, yes, it's all about the principle, but there's certain instances where you just got to kind of evaluate things and say, you know what, that $1,000 isn't worth it. I'm moving on. Okay. Now bigger prices, that's when you really got to start questioning things, you know, but you still got to evaluate things. How much is a collections fee, you know, agency going to charge you? Are you going to sell them the debt? What's going to happen? You want to take them to small claims court. How much is that going to cost you? How much in lost wages? There's all kinds of variables in there, but yes, I have had a customer refuse to pay. We've taken people to collections before. I don't think we've ever really been paid. We've been filed bankruptcy on before. That's been a headache. You know, there's lots of crazy business stuff. All right. Okay. Throw some more, questions in there, guys. And I'm going to get up, Pyro 4100. What's up, dude? I'm in SoCal too. I'm in Riverside, California. So, all right, I'm going to go to, oh, hey, I just had to share this. I don't know if you guys saw it yet. I'm a super big Marvel fan. I really like all the Marvel movies and stuff. And I just saw the trailer for the Black Widow movie released today. Super stoked. So that's going to be a really cool one, I think. Anyways, I'm going to go off on that one. Coil cleaners. So in my recent video, I was talking about different coil cleaners. Guys, I keep saying it in my videos, and this is something that I have a problem with. I really, really like the Refrigeration Technologies coil cleaners. No affiliation with the guys, but I really like their products. They're the guys that make Nylog. They make an ice machine cleaner that I really dig. John Pastorello is the guy that started the company, and I believe he runs it with his son now. Again, I don't know a whole lot about them, but really like their products. But one of the problems I have is that it's hard for me to find their products. And so usually I have to special order them at my suppliers that I use. So a lot of times I'm forced to use some of the other cleaners. So for instance, let me give you the example. I'll special order 2 cases of the Refrigeration Technologies heavy duty cleaner, right? And then I'll use them up. And then I get a service call at one of the restaurants where I go out there thinking it's just going to be a service call. And I got to use 8 bottles of coil cleaner because they're so plugged up. A lot of times I don't have 8 bottles of cleaner in my truck. I got to run to the supply house. So I'm not choosing like, oh, I got to find a supply house that carries that. I go to the closest supply house and usually they don't have it. So I end up buying usually new Calgon because they're just flooded out in the market. When you're using a lot of those cleaners, you got to be very, very careful, guys. I usually use the New Bright if I have to choose the new Calgon just because it's super strong, but you got to be very careful because you can destroy a condenser coil in just a matter of minutes by not properly mixing or diluting the cleaner and leaving it on too long. You can hurt rubber roofs, roof materials by leaving the cleaners on the roof, all kinds of different stuff. So when you guys are using cleaners, number one, always use your proper protective glasses, gloves, all that crap, right? But number two, make sure you're rinsing that thing properly. You're not leaving it on there. You don't want to see smoke coming off your coil. If you see smoke coming off your coil, you're doing something wrong. Okay. You want to make sure you get that stuff rinsed off and you want to make sure you're using the proper dilution ratios. Okay. I highly suggest using one of their coil guns if you're going to do that. But yeah, you want to be very, very cautious when you're using coil cleaners. So, okay. Let's see what else we got in here. Where did I get the water spigot attachments for compressors? So I found that on Instagram. It's called a Cool Pressor, Coolpressor. I bought it from them before they were being distributed at any supply houses. I've recently seen that they're being pushed by Supco now. So let me pull it up there. It's a company called Byatec, Byatec. And I'm going to pull up their website for you right now. Let me pull it up here. Byatec.com. I'll put a link in the video right here in the stream. There you go. Byatec.com is where I found that little chingus that I put on top of the compressor. So I just bought it from the dude on Instagram. It cost me like 50 or 75 bucks or something like that. I just thought it was a cool little tool. It's been sitting in my van. I've recently seen some people using it on YouTube now, someone trying to promote them. And then, like I said, they're being pushed by Supco now. So I think Supco went and bought the rights to it or something, as they usually do. And I think they'll start distributing them in the supply houses. Once Supco gets a hold of it, you'll see it in all the supply houses that sell Supco products. So, electrical troubleshooting. Yeah. I will definitely try to do more videos about all the different topics you guys ask me to. One thing you need to remember is that my videos are not planned per se. Okay. So, tomorrow morning, I'm more than likely going to go do an air conditioning call. I've got 3 air conditioners down at one of my restaurants. That's all that I know is I'm going out there to do an air conditioning call. Whether or not I can do a video on it, I don't know. There's a lot of factors that go into whether or not I can do a video. So I definitely take your suggestions that you guys put, the questions like, hey, can you do a video on electrical troubleshooting or ice machines or whatever? I will try to do all those videos when I get the opportunity, but it's not a matter of me just going, hey, I'm going to make a video about an ice machine and go find an ice machine to work on. It really depends on the calls that come in. So, but yes, keep sending me the videos. If you guys have suggestions, I will try to get to them. What I really like is the suggestions more so than just say, hey, do a video on ice machines. Say, hey, do a video on this ice machine because this is the problem I run into. And then I have some more, okay, so when I run into that, I can show this or that, so. All right. Let's see what else I see in here. Can you install a CFM motor with a higher RPM than what is currently on the unit? You need to be very careful about installing motors that have a higher RPM than what is on the unit, because what's going to end up happening is that motor is going to overamp tremendously. Now, it depends on how much higher. If you're talking about going from an 850 RPM motor, like on a York Predator unit or something like that, or York Sunline unit or whatever they were, and you're going to put a 1075, you're going to have problems, okay? So you need to be very, very cautious. I highly suggest you put in the OEM motors and or something comparable, but are we talking like, because on some walk-in coolers, the little condenser fan motor, the 1/20th horsepower condenser fan motor might say 1550 RPMs, and there might be another one that says 1450. 100 RPMs is not going to make that much of a difference. And in all actuality, there really isn't much of a difference between a 1450 and a 1550. It's just the way that they're measuring the RPMs. In all actuality, it still has the same amount of poles in each motor, so it's really going to spin the same. But as far as an 850 to a 1075, yes, there is a difference, and you have to be cautious about that. You have to understand that if we have an air conditioning unit that has an 850 RPM condenser fan motor, and the blade is pitched at to still move a certain amount of air through that condenser. So if you put a higher RPM motor on there with that same blade, that blade is still pitched to move that certain amount of air, but now you're spinning it a lot faster and it's having to work a lot harder, and that motor's more than likely going to overamp and burn up. So highly suggest you put in the OEM and or comparable OEM motor back inside that unit. All right. Let's see what else we got here. Ice machine water filters with no installation dates. Those are always great, So, I mean, basically, I'll just run it until it plugs up. So, unless the customer wants it changed. I got a really interesting unit not working. Can I email me explaining what's going on? You sure can, Ramon. So, you guys are more than welcome to send me an email. Let me pull up my email on here right now. It is hvacrvideos@gmail.com. I'll put it in the chat, and you guys can send me emails all you want. So, all right. Thanks, Justin. Bend the blade. Yeah, good idea. Let me know how that works. Okay. No, I haven't done any aluminum brazing, Michael. But I will say I've seen some videos from Mr. Brian Orr in HVAC school and a lot of the solder weld products talking about, I think they have Alcop brazing rod, and it's aluminum to copper, and it's supposed to be fairly easy. I have some Alcop that actually Brian sent me. I haven't had an opportunity to use it. I really haven't come across many aluminum microchannel coils that were leaking. Knock on wood. Now that I said it, I'm probably going to get my ass handed to me. So, okay, Jim, that is an interesting topic. First off, Jim, I'm going to direct you to Ralph. Ralph was in here earlier. I'm pretty sure he still is. His name on here is Dallas Fan, and I'm going to give you his email address. Ralph works for Honeywell Refrigerants. He's always in here willing to help people with refrigerant conversions. Let me, hang on. I try to write this down. Oh, darn it. Hang on just a second. I'll get it in here. I made a mistake in my emails. Stupid me. I copied the wrong email. One sec. Let me find Ralph's email here. Ralph. Pardon my horrible video method here as I'm trying to type something and copy and paste something. So Control C, here we go. Okay, so this is Ralph's email. If you guys have any refrigerant questions, hit up Ralph. And he works for Honeywell Refrigerants. Now, what I'm going to say, proper methods on converting a refrigerant. I'm not, there is refrigerants that will work with mineral oil and other oils besides POE, okay? But most of the R22 substitutes, all right? Well, first off, R22 uses typically mineral oil, okay? Newer systems will use polyester oil, but most R22 compressors out there are going to be mineral oil. The problem with mineral oil and a lot of the R22 replacements is the oil's not miscible with the refrigerant, okay, the new refrigerant. So meaning that in an R22 system, when you have R22 refrigerant, a lot of times oil will leave the compressor and it travels with the refrigerant. It adheres to the refrigerant and moves with it, and it'll come back to the compressor, okay? Now, with some of these alternative refrigerants, we can have some problems, okay? I will say that a lot of times with the alternative refrigerants, they add an HC component or a hydrocarbon component to the refrigerant, okay? The refrigerant in its essence is not necessarily compatible with polyester oil, but with the hydrocarbon component adding to the oil, it will typically make it miscible, or the oil will travel better with that alternative refrigerant. Okay, so the question then happens to be, when you go to use one of those alternative refrigerants, there's a lot of factors that come into play. So each instance is going to be different, and you want to evaluate each one very carefully. Does your system have a high pressure drop? Does it have high risers? There's all kinds of factors that come into play. Best case, best practices is to use polyester oil with any of the new alternative refrigerants, but sometimes you can't, right? So then you have some of these refrigerants that they claim that they will work kind of okay with some of the, mineral oil or alkylbenzene oils and different things. You just have to understand that each situation is going to be different, and you need to evaluate that situation very carefully. Certain manufacturers, such as like a Train, big package unit with the 3D scroll compressors, I would highly suggest you think twice about using any alternative refrigerants in anything with the 3D scroll if it has mineral oil in it. If it already has polyester oil, then you're good to go. But if it doesn't have polyester oil, be very cautious about using any alternative refrigerants with a Train 3D scroll. It relies on that refrigerant coming back to lubricate the bearings in the compressor. I know from experience that one has bit me in the ass, and it's not good. But I'm not saying that those alternative refrigerants won't ever work with mineral oil or alkylbenzene. You just have to evaluate each situation. There's some people that claim you can add certain amounts of polyester oil to a system. I'm not going to argue with that. I've heard people saying it works great, and you can go right ahead and try it. If you can reach out to Ralph will probably give you some information, and he can probably help you a little bit more than myself. So, all right. Is Nightbot bugging? All right. Let's see what else we got in here. See if I'm missing any questions. If I missed your guys' questions, throw them in caps lock in the bottom again, okay? Sam Cummins, just split and washed 7 RTUs that dropped head pressure on average 75 PSI. Yep. Very, very crazy, man. So a lot of people don't realize they need to split condenser coils. Really good question I have here, okay? Sight glasses. All right, so someone asked me, what's the purpose of using a sight glass? And my response is, number one, if we're using a Sporlan sight glass, it can be used as a moisture indicator, okay? So it can let us know if there's any moistures in the system that could potentially harm some things, okay? The other thing that a sight glass does is wherever it is installed, and you need to listen to this carefully, wherever that sight glass is installed in the system, it'll tell us the state of the refrigerant at that point in the system. So we will typically install a sight glass before the expansion valve somewhere on the liquid line. okay? And that will help us to understand when we have a clear, solid column of liquid going to that expansion valve. Now, listen to me carefully. That applies to air conditioning systems, residential split systems, and that applies to refrigeration systems. Now, before you guys start screaming at me, a sight glass serves a purpose on a residential split system. Most people don't use them because we use subcooling as a method to charge our system. And this is a system that has an expansion valve, okay? But we'll typically use subcooling to look at our system and to charge it, right? So subcooling is a good method to let us know if we have liquid refrigerant go into our expansion valve, right? But a sight glass can also serve a purpose on an air conditioning system. Now, on a refrigeration system, taking out low ambient controls and different things, we will typically charge a refrigeration system that has an expansion valve and a receiver to a clear sight glass. And for the most part, as long as we don't have any other funky other components in the system, that system will be fully charged. Now, that is not the case on an air conditioning system, but a sight glass can still be a valuable resource on an air conditioning system. And I haven't released a video yet, but I talked about this in a video recently. I have a commercial split system that has like a 100-foot line set. And so what I'll do when you're doing a preventative maintenance, a sight glass on a residential system and or on a commercial split system or even on a package unit can still be a great resource, because an expansion valve still works off of the principle that we need to have a solid column of liquid going to it, okay? So if you have a sight glass in the system on an air conditioning system, you don't just look at the sight glass. You still are going to use subcooling. But if you have a flashing sight glass and your airflow is good and there's no other iced up evaporator coils or anything, it's an indication on an air conditioning system of a gross undercharge, meaning a massive undercharge, okay? Again, I'm make this clear. Just because you have a clear sight glass on an air conditioning system does not mean it's properly charged, but it means that you have liquid going to your expansion valve. We'll still typically add more refrigerant to the system to get our subcooling up high enough to charge the unit properly, okay? But a sight glass is an indicator to let us know if there's moisture in the system, and it's an indicator of wherever it's installed, that point in the system, we have a solid column of liquid, okay? All right. Yes, you do have to be careful using a sight glass to charge, but you still need to have a solid column of liquid go into that expansion valve. That's something we need to be very, very careful about. But yes, Ralph is correct. Okay, so there's a lot of factors that come into some of these new refrigerants that have high glide, okay? That's a whole nother topic. And you need to be very, very cautious about knowing when to... how to check superheat and different things on the systems that have high glide. You also need to be careful when you're using an alternative refrigerant, because especially if it's replacing like R22 or R404A, you need to be cautious because especially with the R22 stuff, a lot of times we would, and this is a certain instance where you guys might run into. So I came up in the trade when we were still using R12 refrigerant. There was a lot of R12 out there when I was coming up. So one of the things we would do as an alternative for an R12 system, it was really easy, was because it still used mineral oil for R12 and it used mineral oil for R22. So it was really easy to change the expansion valve on a refrigeration system and change the compressor by itself, just the compressor, change the compressor and the expansion valve. And then guess what? We would drop in R22 refrigerant. Okay, and it would get us by, but we would typically run a little bit higher of a head pressure when we did that. So what would happen is someone might come in and put an R22 retrofit in there, and the system was not properly designed for that R22 retrofit because it was designed for an R12 system. The receiver's not big enough, the condenser's not rejecting enough heat, we run into problems. That's an instance where if you cleared the sight glass, you might overload that system. Does it mean that you're not supposed to clear the sight glass? No, because an expansion valve works off of the principle of a solid column of liquid going to it. But there is instances where people have converted or retrofitted systems and they will not operate at all if you clear the sight glass. It doesn't mean that it's right, but sometimes you might have to leave them bubbling a little bit, and that's not correct because that expansion valve's not getting a solid column of liquid. But with some of the alternative refrigerants, you might have to do that in the interim until you can get a permanent replacement or properly design whatever components for the system. So if you're going to use an alternative refrigerant, you need to be very careful that the system components are designed properly. But an expansion valve is meant to operate with a solid column of liquid going to it. So you do need to understand that. Another thing to remember too is just because you have a clear sight glass on the roof does not mean that you have a clear or you would potentially have a clear sight glass right before the expansion valve because you could have a restriction in the liquid line somewhere. So like I said in the very beginning, a sight glass is an indicator of a solid column of liquid at that point in the system. Okay. All right. No, a sight glass does not have an advantage besides moisture indication in a fixed orifice residential split where you charge by superheat. You do not use a sight glass. You do not clear a sight glass. You need to understand how a sight glass works. A sight glass, if you're using it as a refrigerant charge indicator, you completely ignore it when you're working on a fixed orifice or piston driven or capillary tube system. Sight glasses are really only meant to be used as a moisture indicator on a system like that. So that's where people say to be very, very careful. Can you pump down test a cap tube system with no receiver? No, you cannot, Ralph, because the condenser is usually not sized big enough to allow for that refrigerant to be stored in the condenser. Now, you can do a suction pump down test where you basically front seat the suction valve and test the suction valve with the compressor. You can definitely do that, but you cannot pump down the high side or the liquid side of a cap tube system. There's usually not enough storage capacity in the system. You need a receiver to do a proper pump down on a liquid line of a cap tube or a fixed orifice system. And then a receiver wouldn't work with a cap tube or a fixed orifice. It'd be highly, highly inefficient to put a receiver. I've seen them. I've seen people put receivers on them, but it's a horrible, horrible design. So, all right, what else we got in here? I had old school text say 404 systems don't always show full sight glasses, that they always bubble. Thoughts? You know, there's a lot of variables that go into that, you know, so basically, I'm kind of opening a can of worms here. I'm not trying to talk crap about other techs. Maybe there's something going on in that system. Maybe the condenser was never sized right. So maybe that's why you can't clear it. But on a properly operating, properly designed system, even with 404A refrigerant, that has an expansion valve and a receiver, you will have a clear sight glass on that system when it is operating properly. Okay. Now, if there's a component in there that wasn't sized right or something like that, then maybe some person let a little refrigerant out, but it's not right. Okay, on a system that has an expansion valve with a receiver, you're supposed to have a clear sight glass, period. A clear solid column of liquid going to that expansion valve. But again, there's some variables that could be in there. So I don't want to say someone's wrong, okay? But if it was designed correctly, it's supposed to have a solid column of liquid going to the expansion valve on the liquid line. How does a sight glass indicate moisture? Sorry, no, it's not a rookie question. So inside the sight glass is a small piece of paper, essentially. This is a really quick vague explanation that reacts to moisture. So it'll be green on a Sporlan sight glass when there's no moisture present, or it'll turn yellow when there's moisture present. So it's there's a certain name for the type of paper that's inside there, and it just is so the liquid refrigerant can be in there, but if it has any moisture from the air or anything like that inside there, it'll react to that moisture. So, all right, let's see what else I'm missing here. Make sure cycles are full and set super ready Hvacr coil. Okay, so what's happening with the merch? So I placed a merch order with a legit company, so it'll be here soon. I placed I actually went to a legit company and a legit person that designed a whole new t-shirt for me. Cost me a lot of money. 2 arms and 2 legs, but there's supposed to be some nice shirts and some nice hats. I ordered samples. Even the samples cost me a lot of money. So I'm hoping that by spending a lot of money, I might get a quality piece of merch. So I'm waiting on the samples to show up. If the samples show up, then I will release them. So again, it's just one of those things, guys. I don't want to release something if it's not nice. So I don't want crap stuff being sold. So, okay. All right. So let me see what else I got on my list right here. What app do I use for troubleshooting? That was a question I got a lot, and that is Measure Quick. So in the show notes of this video, I've already put a bunch of links, guys. I put a bunch of links to the books that I always recommend. I put a bunch. So basically, any videos that I release, guys, go to the show notes, okay? Even on your phone, you can look at the show notes of the videos. There's like a little drop-down tab, and there's Amazon links for all kinds of different products that I'm always recommending. So always check out those show notes. There's always great information. If you guys happen to purchase anything from my Amazon links, it does support me a little bit. I get like a small commission. I have like an Amazon affiliate account. But one thing I do want to say, I had someone approach me and they messaged me and they said, hey, I'm going to buy a vacuum pump. Would you recommend the Field Piece vacuum pump? And yes, I did recommend the Field Piece vacuum pump. And then he told me that he was going to buy it from Amazon. And I told him, dude, don't buy that from Amazon. I highly suggest that you buy any of your high dollar tools from supply houses. I always like to support my supply houses whenever possible, but some of the small stuff I always throw it like an Amazon link or something like that. But you always want to support your supply houses because your supply houses are the people that are going to be there for you. Amazon's not going to be there for you when you go to, when you have a compressor that's not working right, or when you need them to open up on Saturday to get you a part. That's going to be your supply houses. So as much as possible, you want to support them. I know there's some instances where I'll order something because the supply house is just way too expensive, but but I don't ever order repair parts. Sometimes I'll order tools. That's about the most I'll go with Amazon. But big dollar items like vacuum pumps and recovery machines, hell no. I'm ordering that stuff from a supply house because when it breaks, I'm taking it back to the supply house. So no, I don't, Tim. I do not work on Chili's. So one of the app that I highly suggest, if I didn't already say this, was MeasureQuick. MeasureQuick is a great app, and it's being developed every day. There's more coming out. I know it's been on the roadmap to do refrigeration stuff in MeasureQuick, so very, very good. What is the best brand to buy for HVAC parts? It all depends, Ramon. Depends on what you're working on, man. So it really depends. There's all kinds of different stuff out there. Send me an email. We can talk more about what you're talking about. Cap tube is restricted. How do you resolve it? Change it and then find out why it restricted. If it's an R134A reach-in cooler and it's got a restricted cap tube, more than likely it had a dirty condenser. The oil inside the system overheated and basically, in a nutshell, turned to bacon grease, kind of like if you leave bacon grease out on the counter. Okay, it kind of coagulates, gets really thick, and then plugs up the capillary tubes. Sometimes you can get by with cleaning the condenser, putting a good filter dryer, and changing the cap tube. But if you have a severe system, the only thing that's going to solve your problem is to change the compressor, the cap tube, possibly the condenser, depending on the oil contamination. It all depends on the situation. So a lot of times if I'm working on a true condensing unit, and it's a very, very plugged up cap tube, I'll reach out to True and I'll say, hey, I want to put a new condensing unit in this. A lot of times they'll send you out a new condensing unit under warranty. Actually, anytime that you have a True compressor under warranty, they'll give you the option. Do you want just the compressor or the whole condensing unit? And usually I'll choose the condensing unit because you get a clean system, and then put a new cap tube on it and call it a day. So any reason why I can't get 10 degrees subcooling on a walk-in? No headmaster and sight glass was full. Couldn't get more than 4 to 5. Okay, that's a great question. Okay, we don't use subcooling as a metric for charging refrigeration systems. Okay, we typically will clear sight glass on a refrigeration system. We will pay attention to subcooling as long as we have some subcooling. But the problem is let me ask you, where are you going to measure for that subcooling? You going to measure before the receiver? Are you going to measure coming out of the condenser? Are you going to measure out of the receiver? Everything changes. A receiver is a vessel that has liquid and vapor inside of it at the same time, okay? And that affects the way that the refrigerant operates. So it makes it a problem when you're trying to test for subcooling. So subcooling on a refrigeration system is usually not a metric that we'll charge to. We clear the sight glass. If the sight glass is clear, we then wait for the box to come down to temperature. Once the box is within 5 degrees of operating set point, then we will adjust our expansion valve superheat to the proper superheat levels. There's a whole new ball game to deal with when we're dealing with these high glide refrigerants and superheat. That's a whole nother topic we'll cover. Brian Ord actually just did one, I think, where he talked with Jim Bergman. It was a really good podcast. If you guys haven't heard that, check it out. It was called Midpoint, and how to use midpoint as your testing method for checking evaporator temperature. Very, very good podcast. So HVACschool.com, HVACrschool.com is Brian Orr's website, and you can find his podcasts on there. So, okay. Yeah, if you guys didn't know that, anytime you're working on a True unit and you have a bad compressor under warranty, just tell them, hey, I want to get a condensing unit. They'll ship you out a whole condensing unit under warranty, no questions asked, rather than just the compressor. And that usually eliminates the cap tube problems, because if you change the whole condensing unit, put a new cap tube on it, and a good dryer, get rid of that stupid copper spun dryer that they send you with the warranty stuff. Buy yourself some time, put a Sporlan catch-all dryer on there, the Cap T dryer, and call it a day. So, all right. Yeah, Tim, I've heard of that. I've never really had good methods with it. I've done that method, Tim, like on a train package unit to try to get oil to return back to the compressor. yeah, I haven't had any lucks doing anything in the system to try to clear cap tubes or anything like that. It's just usually if it's got a restriction, you got to change whatever's restricted. Big deal. I mean, sometimes you can get by with like heating up the AccuTrol metering devices on like a train package unit or a carrier package unit. But the way to be 100% sure is to change the whole metering device. So, all right. Do I use the same flame every time I braze? Yeah, in a nutshell, I may change the tip on my torch, but I usually go a little big on my torch tip. I roll with a number 2 tip on my oxyacetylene torch pretty much for everything, under 7/8. I'll even use it on some 7/8 stuff, but if I'm having to like unsweat or brazen a 7/8, sometimes I'll switch to my rosebud tip, which I don't know the number on my rosebud tip, but it'll basically do up to like 2-inch copper. So for the most part, I'm rolling with the number 2 tip, which is usually a little big, but I run my flame a little hot when I'm using my brazing torch because I like to be in and out real quick. So if I'm brazing in an expansion valve, try to get that thing done as quick as possible. Use a hot flame, get it on, get it cooled off, and move on. Let's see. What is my step-by-step process in finding a refrigerant leak? Okay, so I should probably do a video on that. I can probably do a little bit better than verbally talking about it in a live stream. But the biggest thing, Steve, let me get to that question in just a sec. So the biggest thing when doing a refrigerant leak check is make sure that the system's off, make sure all the fans, anything moving air in the system is completely turned off. Make sure your pressures are equalized out in the system. If you're working on a refrigeration system, as long as everything's off, take your gauges and open each one and equalize the high side and the low side to get equal pressures in the low and the high side. Okay, with everything off. Same thing on an air conditioning system. Equalize out the pressure so that way you have the same amount of pressure in the condenser as you do in the evaporator. Then use your electronic leak detector and start from square one and work your way up. I usually start with the bottom and work my way up. And then, but I could do a video on that talking about it more. So let's see. I saw... just a guy, Ray, talk to the ice machine manufacturer. There's some metrics out there based off of the sales that the restaurant predicts that they're going to do. And then like Hoshizaki ice machines will tell you, yeah, you'll get away with this size machine or Manitowoc ice machine. So reach out to the manufacturer or the distributor and they'll tell you based off of the potential sales of the restaurant, what size ice machine they might need. So how do you tell which part of the system is... So there was another question in here that I wanted to get to, and they're going by too fast for me. Oh, have I worked on racks with oil separators? Very minimal work with oil separators. I think they're the greatest thing in the world. I think every system out there should have an oil separator on it. Essentially, guys, the discharge line basically coming out of the compressor before it goes to the condenser goes into a storage vessel, and the design of the storage vessel allows the oil that's in the discharge of the compressor the oil that's in the discharge gas basically gets stuck in the separator, and then the discharge line continues onto the liquid line. So the oil separators, they're really, really cool, but there's a lot of problems with oil separators too, especially on dirty systems that are contaminated, because depending on the type of oil separator, it might have a float mechanism, literally like a water float inside the oil separator. And whenever that float gets to a certain level, it might allow that liquid oil to transfer back into the compressor. There's all kinds of different methods of doing it. So, but oil separators are great, but it all depends on what type you're using and how clean your system is. But I have worked on a few of them, but not many. So, all right. Do I have a preferred manufacturer of capacitor? I really, really like the Amrad products. Amrad seems to make a very, very high quality capacitor. My understanding is that they're American made. I don't know if that's absolutely true, but I think they make them in Florida somewhere. But I've always liked Amrad products, and they're the ones that make like the Turbo 200 capacitors. And if you guys didn't know this, for you refrigeration guys, so if you guys know the Turbo 200 run cap, right? It's a run cap made by Amrad, and it's got like a 5-year warranty, and you can use it for all different sizes, and you can add them up and do different things. Amrad also makes one of those style capacitors for a start cap. I'll have to show it sometime, but I keep universal start capacitor by Amrad on all of my trucks. So if you're in a pinch and you need a start cap for a compressor, or if you just want to test if a compressor is going to start up, I have a universal start cap, and it's not a 3-in-1. It's just a dedicated start cap. Very, very cool. And it's made by Amrad. So, All right, let's see what else. Can I do multi-circuit leak search video if you do want to appreciate it? Yeah, I honestly, dude, if you go through my channel, you'll probably find some multi-circuit stuff. So, but yeah, I can try to do something there. Let me see. Can I control humidity in walk-ins with superheat? If not, how would you do it? Yes, to a certain extent, Ralph. But okay, so you know, we can adjust the temperature differential of our evaporator coil. Okay, the typical temperature differential on an evaporator coil is about 10 degrees on a walk-in. So yes, we can play with the TD a little bit by adjusting our expansion valve. But in all reality, the size of your evaporator coil is going to determine the humidity. Okay, so if we oversize our evaporator coil, we have shorter run times. We're potentially going to have higher humidity. But if we undersize our evaporator coil, we have longer run times. We're potentially going to have lower humidity. So if a system was fully and properly designed from the get-go, you could control superheat a little bit better, but you're not going to be able to just basically wrench on a valve and change the humidity 20% in a walk-in just by wrenching on a valve, because it all depends on how it was sized. Okay, so you get a little bit of play out of an expansion valve, but really it's how big your evaporator coil is. So you need to properly design it using a load calculation software with the correct amount of humidity you want inside that box from the get-go. All right, let's see. Well, gentlemen, I think we're going to wrap this up because we're going on an hour and a half. Unless you guys have any more big questions you want to throw in here, I'm probably going to get ready to wrap this up. So I'll give it another couple seconds, see if I see any more questions, and then we will get going. If you guys have questions, again, send me emails to hvacrvideos@gmail.com, okay? And I will gladly try to get to those. Have I ever worked in a Wine Guardian cooling equipment? No, I have not, Chris. I've never really done any wine work per se. I think I might have worked on a reach-in cooler for a wine cooler running like 45 or 55 degrees or something like that, but never much work with wine stuff. Have I ever had anything blow up? Not like nothing great to talk about. I've had a refrigerant hose explode on me that scared the crap out of me while I was working on a roof in Palm Springs one time. I had an old, dried up, brittle, high side hose that basically the fitting stayed on the Schrader valve and the hose blew off and it started blowing refrigerant ever inside and scared the crap out of me while I was working on it. But I've never had anything blow up per se. So I'm always being very cautious when I'm dealing with that stuff. So you're helping with a compressor change out tomorrow. Anything you can do to make the tech's life easier? Yeah. So when you're going to the job, if you can, pick the tech's brain before and get a game plan. Let's do a site walk. Let's say, okay, hey, I want to be the best helper I can be. What can I do to help you? And have him explain his idea of what he's going to do. So the first thing, he's probably going to take all of his materials up there. So, okay, what do I need to bring out? Do I need to bring up recovery machines? Do I need to help you with this? And think about something. Every time that tech needs something, you want to think about it in your brain before he thinks about it. And I know that's impossible, but you want to try to keep that in mind. You want to try to guess and predict what he's going to need. So that way when he says, hey, can you go get me this wrench? Dude, I got it right here. You know, or, hey, I need a bucket of water to put that recovery vessel in. You already got it for him. So you want to try to be prepared and, you know, just be observant. All right, gentlemen. Any of the questions I'm missing, go ahead and send me an email. I will highly appreciate that, and I'll try to get to them with everything, okay? So, yeah, like Justin just said, the show would be nothing without you guys. Exactly, okay? You guys make this show. Your questions, your comments, and your support really, really help. So I'm going to go ahead and transition this thing, and I'm going to go ahead and let's put that right there and transition on over. Really appreciate it, guys. And here we go. And let's put the outro music coming on.